Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Today we've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. Mark had always been a steady guy. Growing up in those brutal Minnesota winters hammered a quiet toughness into him, something that helped him handle whatever life threw his way. His dad, a foreman at the logging company, taught him the value of hard work and looking after himself. His mom, a nurse at the local hospital, showed him kindness and patience. After acing his mechanical engineering degree, Mark started North Star Heating, a company that made top-notch heating systems for freezing weather. His big invention, a heating system that used hardly any energy, made him rich by the time he was 35. He met Olivia at a charity party in Minneapolis. She was the daughter of Robert Walker, a big shot in real estate, and Olivia had this captivating beauty that just drew Mark in. Her blonde hair flowed over her fancy dresses, and her laugh seemed to brighten up the whole room. They danced that night, and what started as just a meeting turned into a crazy fast romance. Robert Walker had made his money building fancy properties all over the Midwest, specializing in expensive places by the water and high-end stores. The Walkers were old money, powerful, and super protective of their only daughter. From the start, they saw Mark as an outsider, a self-made guy whose hands had done real work and whose accent still had a bit of that small-town sound. "He's just not our kind, Olivia," Robert kept telling her. "His company's doing well, I'll give him that, but he doesn't have the background, the connections." Eleanor Walker, Olivia's mom, was even less subtle. "Sweetheart, there are so many nice men from families we've known forever. Why settle for someone who grew up in the middle of nowhere?" But Olivia seemed determined. "I love him, Mom. He's brilliant, works so hard, and he treats me like gold. What more could I want?" Their wedding was at the Walker family's huge estate, a fancy event that was all over the society pages for 3 states. Mark felt awkward with all the showiness but wanted Olivia to be happy. His parents watched proudly as their son married into one of the most important families around, even though they also felt that coldness coming from the bride's side. For the first couple of years, their marriage seemed perfect. They bought this amazing modern house in the woods outside Minneapolis, mixing Olivia's love for luxury with Mark's love for nature. He grew his business, and she started managing her dad's charity. They talked about kids, planned trips, and built what Mark thought was a strong partnership. The first little cracks started showing up slowly. Olivia began hanging out more with her childhood friends, especially Tim Nelson, the son of a state senator who was now a rising star in politics himself. Newly elected as the youngest state representative in Minnesota history, Tim was all ambition and charm. Whenever he showed up at parties, Olivia seemed to light up in a way Mark hadn't seen in months. "He's just an old friend," Olivia would say whenever Mark mentioned her lively chats with Tim. "We practically grew up together at the same country club. It's nothing." But Mark noticed the lingering looks, the private jokes, the way Olivia would check her phone and smile secretly. Work kept him busy, sometimes sending him to installation sites all over the cold northern states. During one 2-week trip to North Dakota, he called home every night. But Olivia's answers got shorter and more distracted. When he came home a day early to surprise her, the house was empty, even though her car was in the garage. A text message hours later said she was catching up with old friends and would be home late. That night, when she slipped into bed smelling of some cologne he didn't recognize, Mark felt this cold feeling settle in his chest, something that would eventually turn into the ice of betrayal. The Walker family's yearly winter getaway at their Lake Superior place had always been tense for Mark. But this year, the air felt especially frozen. The huge property, with its stone front and massive windows looking out at the frozen lake, held 3 generations of Walkers and their favorite people for a week-long party leading up to Christmas. "Remember to mention our donation to Senator Nelson's education thing," Eleanor told her daughter as they got ready for dinner. "Tim will be thrilled to hear his dad's program has our support." Mark pretended not to see the look that passed between mother and daughter. All evening, he watched how the family put Olivia and Tim together at every chance they got. Where they sat, what activities they did, even photos. Robert Walker clapped Tim hard on the shoulder during drinks. "The youngest state representative in history, and mark my words, he'll be governor before he's 40, Robert boasted. "We need men like you leading this state, son." The son didn't go unnoticed by Mark, who had never once been called that by his father-in-law in 3 years of marriage. Later that night, Mark overheard Olivia talking to her cousin Sarah while getting his jacket from the coat room. "So, how long has this thing with Tim been going on?" Sarah asked, not even trying to hide her curiosity. Olivia's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's complicated. We've always had a connection, you know that. But things have gotten intense these past few months." "What about Mark?" A pause. "Mark was a mistake. My parents were right. He doesn't fit in our world. Never has. You should see how people look at him at the club." "So, what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. Tim has his political career to think about. A messy divorce wouldn't look good for his image." Mark slipped away, his mind racing. That night, he looked through Olivia's phone while she was in the shower and found hundreds of messages between her and Tim. Explicit, intimate stuff that left no doubt about what was going on. The next few days at the Walker estate were all about Mark keeping his cool. He acted normal while inside he was taking note of every little insult, every whispered conversation, every touch between his wife and her lover. He saw how the whole Walker clan seemed to be in on it, making it easy for the affair to happen right under his nose. Robert pulled Mark aside on the third day. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," he started, being unusually friendly. "There's a business opportunity in Colorado, a development project that needs someone with your technical background. It would mean moving, of course." Mark understood right away. They wanted him gone, shipped off to some faraway project while Olivia and Tim carried on, conveniently separated by distance. "That's interesting," Mark replied calmly. "I'll need to think about it." Of course," Robert nodded, patting Mark's shoulder. "No rush, though these opportunities don't come along often." That evening, a huge snowstorm hit, dumping almost 2 feet of snow in just a few hours. The wind howled around the stone mansion, piling up massive drifts against the walls and doors. Inside, the Walker family gathered in the main hall by a roaring fire, drinking warm spiced wine and talking about family traditions that Mark felt completely left out of. Mark excused himself to make an important business call, stepping onto the covered porch where the reception was better. The door clicked shut behind him as he finished his call. When he tried the handle to go back inside, it was locked. Through the frosted glass, he could see Olivia, Tim, and several Walkers watching him. Mark knocked, first gently, then harder as the bitter cold started to seep through his light sweater. They didn't move to help him. "Open the door," he called, his breath turning into clouds in the freezing air. Olivia stepped closer to the glass, her face visible through the frost. She was laughing. Behind her, Tim wrapped an arm around her waist possessively. Robert Walker raised his wine glass in what looked like a mocking toast. "Freeze to death, you worthless idiot." Olivia's voice carried through the door, followed by loud laughter from the family. Mark stood there for a long moment, the temperature way below zero, the wind cutting through his clothes like knives. He saw his marriage for what it really was, a cruel joke at his expense. Without another word, he turned and walked away from the house, trudging through knee-deep snow toward the service road where his truck was parked. Behind him, the laughter continued, none of them believing he would actually leave in such dangerous conditions. None of them knowing the man they had so badly underestimated. The wind tore through Mark's clothes as he struggled through the snow toward the service road. His truck, a custom-built F-350 made for extreme weather, waited under a layer of fresh snow. Years of growing up in northern Minnesota had taught him to always keep emergency supplies in his truck, a habit that would now save his life. Inside the storage, he found his heavy winter coat, thick gloves, and thermal boots, quickly putting them on as his fingers started to go numb. The truck started right away, its engine modified by Mark himself to work in sub-zero temperatures. As he drove away from the Walker estate, he glanced in his rearview mirror. No one had come after him. No one cared enough to make sure he hadn't frozen to death in one of the worst blizzards in years. That realization hardened something in Mark. The warmth he had felt for Olivia, the hope he had held onto for their marriage despite all the signs. It all froze solid and shattered inside him, leaving behind a cold clarity that would drive his actions in the days ahead. He drove carefully through the blizzard, barely able to see a few feet in front of him. He used his deep knowledge of the area and his truck's capabilities, eventually reaching a small motel off the highway where he checked in for the night. The old owner took one look at him and offered a hot meal along with the room. "Nasty night to be out driving," the man commented. "Must have been something important to risk your neck like that." "It was," Mark replied. "I needed to see things clearly." That night, as the storm raged outside, Mark made his first moves. He called Tony Davis, his company's head of security and a former Army Ranger who had served with Mark's cousin. Tony had skills that went way beyond normal security, skills that had occasionally been useful for North Star Heating's more sensitive business matters. "I need a complete surveillance setup," Mark instructed. "Audio, video, digital. Everything we talked about for that situation in Detroit, but for personal use." Tony knew better than to ask questions. "Timeline, immediate. And Tony, I need absolute secrecy on this." Next, Mark called his lawyer, Sarah Miller, asking for an urgent meeting the next day. Finally, he called his chief operations officer, telling her he'd be taking 2 weeks of personal leave and giving her the authority to make decisions while he was gone. "Is everything okay, boss?" she asked, worried. "It will be," Mark assured her. "I just need to deal with some unexpected stuff." He slept soundly that night, the decision made. The man who had walked into that snowstorm trying to save his marriage was gone. The man who emerged had a single focus that would keep him going through what was to come. The next morning, Mark drove to his company headquarters in Minneapolis, avoiding the home he shared with Olivia. In his private office, he started gathering financial information, moving funds into separate accounts that he had set up as backup plans when his business started doing well. Always careful, Mark had kept his finances separate despite Olivia's attempts to combine their assets. 62 missed calls and 27 text messages from Olivia piled up on his phone that day. He didn't read any of them, focusing instead on starting what was quickly becoming a plan. His meeting with Sarah Miller was short and to the point. "I need divorce papers drawn up immediately," he explained, sliding a USB drive across her desk. "This has proof of infidelity. I want our assets protected and separated as cleanly as possible." Sarah, a sharp woman in her 50s who had built her reputation on handling messy divorces quietly, nodded. "And if she fights it?" "She won't," Mark said with certainty. "Not after what I'm about to do." By evening, Tony arrived with the equipment, cutting-edge surveillance tech that would be the backbone of Mark's strategy. They spent hours going over the devices and what they could do. "This isn't just about divorce evidence, is it?" Tony finally asked. Mark's face stayed blank. "No, it's about justice." 3 days after walking away from the Walker estate, having ignored every message from Olivia and her family, Mark checked into a suite at the Four Seasons Minneapolis under a different name. From this command center, he would orchestrate a series of events that would destroy the comfortable worlds of those who had laughed as they told him to freeze to death. His phone buzzed with another message from Olivia, the first one he chose to read. "Where are you? My father is furious. We need to talk right now. Call me back, or I swear I'll..." He deleted it without reading further, then turned his attention to the detailed files Tony had put together on Tim Nelson, Robert Walker, and several key people in their political and business circles. As he looked through the information, a plan began to form. A plan that would use the Walker family's own connections, pride, and ambitions against them. Mark opened his laptop and started writing a series of emails that would set his revenge in motion. In the quiet hotel room, with the winter sun setting early over the Minneapolis skyline, he smiled for the first time in days. The temperature outside kept dropping, but the cold inside Mark had already reached absolute zero, where nothing moved, nothing forgave, and nothing would stop the calculated payback to come. The presidential suite at the Four Seasons became Mark's war room. 3 laptops sat on the desk, each for a different part of his plan. Maps, documents, and surveillance photos covered one wall, connected by a red string that traced relationships and weak points. Tony had really come through, providing information that went way beyond what normal background checks would find. "Tim Nelson has bigger plans than just being a state representative," Mark muttered, studying the political file. "Campaign finance records show he's laying the groundwork for a congressional run next year." This was the first point of leverage. Mark contacted Sarah Miller, who connected him with Lisa Novak, an investigative journalist known for exposing political corruption. Without revealing his personal involvement, Mark gave her information about questionable donations to Tim's campaign, nothing illegal, but shady enough to raise eyebrows. These donation patterns suggest favors being exchanged for several development projects that got approved unusually fast, Mark explained during their secret meeting at a small coffee shop away from the political center of Minneapolis. Lisa's eyes narrowed as she looked over the documents. "What's your angle here? Why bring this to me?" "Let's just say I believe in political transparency," Mark replied with a thin smile. "There's more where this came from if you decide to look into it." Next, Mark focused on Robert Walker's business empire. Through his own company connections, he found out that Walker Developments was stretched thin, having expanded too quickly in the last year based on promises of political support for zoning changes, support that Tim Nelson had quietly helped arrange. Mark reached out to several key investors in Walker's latest project, an exclusive lakeside development that needed special environmental permissions. "I thought you should know that the environmental impact study for the Walker Point development has some concerning issues," he told them anonymously. "The assessment of protected wetlands seems to have been changed after it was first submitted." Seeds of doubt planted, Mark turned his attention to the most personal part of his plan. Tony had successfully installed surveillance equipment in both Olivia and Mark's shared home and in the apartment Tim kept for constituent meetings, a place that had clearly become their main hideout. For 3 days, Mark watched and listened. He observed their intimate moments without any emotion, noting instead the information they unintentionally revealed. Tim's political weaknesses, Olivia's access to her father's business accounts, plans they were making for when Mark was out of the picture. "He'll agree to the Colorado project eventually," Olivia told Tim during one recorded conversation. "My father is increasing the financial incentives. Once he's moved, we'll have at least a year to figure out the divorce so it doesn't hurt your political image too much." Tim kissed her. "Your father has been a huge help in getting me ready for the congressional race. We can't afford any scandals now." Olivia laughed dismissively. "Mark has always been desperate to be accepted by my family. He'll do whatever my father suggests just to stay in his good graces. The contempt in her voice solidified Mark's resolve. This wasn't just about cheating. It was calculated manipulation designed to get rid of him while protecting their reputations and ambitions. On the 7th day of his disappearance, as panic started to set in among the Walkers and Tim, Mark made his first direct move. He sent identical packages to Olivia, Tim, Robert Walker, and Tim's campaign manager. Each contained a single USB drive and a note that simply read, "I know everything. This is just a preview." The drives contained short audio clips from conversations between Olivia and Tim discussing how to manipulate Mark, along with snippets of their intimate encounters. Nothing explicitly damaging to Tim's political career, but enough to show that Mark had extensive recordings. The reaction was immediate and panicked. Mark watched through the surveillance feeds as Olivia frantically called Tim, who rushed to her house despite the risk of being seen. How did he get these recordings? Tim demanded, his political composure falling apart. Where is he? What else does he have? Olivia paced the living room, her expensive heels clicking on the hardwood floors. I don't know. He hasn't answered any of my calls since that night at the lake house. My father is beside himself. He says the Caldwell Group is suddenly hesitant about investing in Walker Point after getting some concerning information about environmental compliance. Tim ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair. This could ruin everything we've worked for. My congressional announcement is in 3 weeks. Mark smiled coldly as he watched their panic unfold. The first phase of his plan was going exactly as he had expected. The next steps would increase the pressure dramatically. Thanks for listening. This story isn't over yet, and things are about to get even more intense. Stay tuned for the next part to see what happens next.